Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad Tehami. In the UK, Islamophobia is on the rise, with the number of organizations sharing the statistics which are of concern and alarming, especially after Israel unleashed its brutality on the innocent people in Gaza. And as we speak, this brutality continues unabated. Now, Islamophobia Response Unit says, let me quote, there was a 365% increase in reports of Islamophobia in October 2023. And it is clear that this is now developing into a long-term trend and is having a profound impact on those affected by it, unquote. Another organization, Tehami, another body that records anti-Muslim hate incidents, says, let me quote, there were 2010 Islamophobic incidents between October the 7th till February the 7th, more than triple the 600 reported during the same period the year before, unquote. Earlier we saw Conservatives suspended the Member of the Parliament, D. Anderson, after his comments about London Mayor Sadiq Khan, which have been widely criticized as Islamophobic. Now, Saida Warsi, a member of the House of Lords and is the first Muslim to serve the cabinet minister, said, let me quote, the attack on Sadiq Khan is very deliberate. It is an attempt to stigmatize, stereotype and silence British Muslims and stop younger generation of British Muslims from entering public life, unquote. Also, earlier, the UK's House of Commons witnessed chaos as the government and the Scottish National Party condemned Speaker Lindsay Hoyle for his handling of a key vote on the support for a ceasefire in Gaza. Later on, we saw the Speaker apologized, saying, let me quote, I tried to do what I thought was the right thing for all sides of this House, unquote. We'll be taking up for discussion in today's show the rise of Islamophobia, particularly in the UK, especially in the aftermath of the brutality that was unleashed by Israel on the innocent people in Gaza. What happens to be the responsibility of international community as overall, because we know that the International Day to Combat Islamophobia is also approaching. As the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution to combat Islamophobia on 15th of March and declaring this particular day as a symbol to fight that particular rising trend of Islamophobia, particularly in the Western countries. That particular effort was spearheaded by Pakistan. Let me quickly bring in our panelists. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Jauhar Saleem. He is former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Mr. Saleem, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also on Skype, we are honored to have been joined by Professor Dr. Mohammed Saeed. He is an educationist. Dr. Saeed, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On the phone line, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Qibla Ayaz. He is chairman of the Council of Islamic Ideology. Dr. Ayaz, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Ayaz. Now, by looking at these statistics, how alarming is this particular trend of rise of Islamophobic incidents in the UK in particular, especially in the aftermath of the brutality unleashed by Israelis on the innocent people in Gaza?
Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's very alarming that after election of the Prime Minister who has an Indian background, the Islamophobic trends have enhanced in Britain, and particularly the last week Islamophobic comments of the Member of Parliament against Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, in which the Member of Parliament has said that Muslims are trying to take over London through Sadiq Khan. So this is very wrong, because Sadiq Khan has been elected not only by the Muslims, but by the native people, the white race people also voted for him, and not only Muslims but Hindus and other communities also supported Sadiq Khan. And the recent policy of Britain against the occupation of Israel, of the Palestinian lands, also speaks that Islamic phobic trends in Britain are on increase.
Right, Dr. Ayaz, now by looking at this statement, later on the Conservatives suspended the MP Lee Anderson. Later on he came up with a statement, a fresh statement that was more apologetic in tone. He said that his words were clumsy, but said they were born out of sheer frustration of what is happening to our beautiful capital city. What is exactly happening to the beautiful city over there, especially when you have already also mentioned that Sadiq Khan is not only elected by the Muslims over there, but also by the people at large over there in the capital city, but also he has been very vocal regarding Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and a number of other things also. So why is being specifically targeted by this particular MP?
I think these are just lame excuses. The election of Sadiq Khan has added to the grandeur and respect of London, because this actually speaks of the inclusive society that Britain had. And I think that MP has tried to make a dent in the good image of London and Britain, which was prevailing before his statement and the recent policies of the Prime Minister.
Right, the kind of action that has been taken against him, his suspension, and now he's being supposed to sit in the parliament as an independent member. Do you think that was sufficient to send out a message that could reduce that very frustration that might have been caused after such a clumsy statement, which he himself says was among the British Muslims there?
I think that, and I expect that civil society of Britain will come up with more vigorous statements against him. And, the impression that he has made, a bad impression of London and Britain, can only become better if the civil society reacted in a manner in which the good image of London and Britain is restored.
Right, Dr. Ayaz, let's talk about this particular statement by Ms. Sayeeda Awarsi, member of the House of Lords, also served as a co-chairwoman of the Conservative Party from 2010 to 2012. And now she has said that we cannot have a hierarchy of racism within political parties. We don't tolerate anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, and we shouldn't tolerate anti-Muslim racism also. Now, at one side, when there is least tolerance as to anti-Semitism or homophobia, why such an urgency doesn't seem to be prevalent in the hierarchy of the politicians and the members of the parliament when it comes to specifically dealing or addressing Islamophobia? Dr. Qibla Ayaz, can you hear me, please?
Yeah. Can you
go
repeat
ahead.
the question? I couldn't hear it properly.
Okay, by trying to analyze this particular statement by Ms. Sayeeda Awarsi, that we cannot have a hierarchy of racism within political parties. We don't tolerate anti-Semitism or homophobia, and we shouldn't tolerate anti-Muslim racism. So when there is so much urgency and there is so much sensitivity which is associated with anti-Semitism or homophobia, why there isn't such an urgency or sensitivity associated dealing with Islamophobia among the ranks of the members of the parliament there?
Well, Sayeeda Awarsi's statement is very welcoming, and I think such statements should come from other members of parliament as well. This is very important for the good image of Britain, and particularly London, which is a very cosmopolitan city, and people at large feel very comfortable in places like London. So I think that the MP in question has destroyed actually and has damaged the good image of Britain that has been prevailing in the Muslim world, particularly the King of Britain, Prince Charles, has a very good image among Muslims, who has always been very vocal in feelings regarding saying that Muslims have been a part of India, a part of British culture. So this sort of statements have been welcomed by the Muslim world at large. I think this image should continue.
Right, Dr. Ayaz, now the second part of this statement when you talk about Ms. Sayyida Warsi, now while saying that this particular attack on Sadiq Khan is very deliberate, it is an attempt to stigmatize, stereotype and silence British Muslims and stop younger generations of British Muslims from entering into public life. After this particular statement, by analyzing the very tone of it and the kind of concern that has been expressed in it, where do you see the things going ahead in near future for the Muslims in Britain?
Yes, things would be becoming a little difficult. And we know that there are already articles in different Islamophobic journals and magazines calling London Londonistan, like, a place for Muslims. So hard work is needed, and our hope is that civil society will definitely play its active role in trying to restore the good image of London and Britain.
Right. What sort of a message does it send across into the world when there has been so much talk about combating Islamophobia, and the United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly also passed a resolution which was spearheaded by Pakistan to declare 15th of March as an international day to combat Islamophobia. So what sort of message such statements, such irresponsible statements on the part of the members of the parliament from the UK send out to the larger world?
Well, what he has said actually is contrary to the resolution of UN. And UN has taken a very revolutionary step by determining 15th March as the day combating our anti-Islamophobia day, encouraging efforts to combat Islamophobia in different parts of the world, particularly Britain. And I think that it is very important for the peace and prosperity of London and Britain that such Islamophobic trends should come to end.
Right, Dr. Qibla Ayaz, Chairman of the Council of Islamic Ideology, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Now, let me proceed with the discussion with you, Mr. Saleem. Now, these statistics which have been shared, of course, by Islamophobia Response Unit as well as the Al-Mama, another body that actually records the incidents of Islamophobia and the kind of impact it does have on the victims. It's a considerable and alarming rise, especially when we talk about since 7th of October 2023 until now, in the last 4 months, 365% rise in October 2023 alone, and 2010 Islamophobic incidents. How alarming and concerning these are, and what does that particular trend actually depict about the happenings in the UK towards Muslims in particular?
Now, Islamophobia is a long-standing issue within Europe. As the Muslim populations rise in major European countries, France, UK, Germany, Italy, other countries, so the friction, because the difference in values is so much, and what we have seen is that whenever there's an issue somewhere in the world, particularly in Israel, this Palestine conflict, or sometimes it was in Iraq or Afghanistan or other places, that is when Islamophobic feelings would suddenly trigger. They're always there, but within manageable limits to a certain extent. But these triggers then create situations where you see these very stark rise in these type of crimes, hate crimes and Islamophobic crimes. In this particular instance, what happened was last Wednesday, it was a day for the Scottish National Party, actually, because they have different days for different parties to present their resolutions. They presented their resolution on the situation in Gaza. It was a brief resolution with basically 3 or 4 points. First, it called for the release of the hostages. Then it called for unimpeded humanitarian assistance. Then it called for an end to the slaughter of innocent people in Gaza, and then for ceasefire resolution. The Labour Party did not want that resolution to pass. So what they did was they introduced an amendment. And the amendment was, and that was a unique situation, the amendment was actually a substitute resolution. The only part of the original SNP resolution which remained was that this House calls for, and just that. The rest of it was all Labour resolution, and a very long one with some good points, but also supporting Canada, Australia, New Zealand resolutions, also supporting certain like parts of what Israel has been calling for. So it was kind of more tilted towards the Western perspective, let's say, in many respects. Although it did include a call for a two-state solution and end to the Israel's ground invasion and basically ceasefire as well. And of course, then we saw that a pandemonium ensued in the UK Parliament, one of the very rare instances that you see these in a very civilized parliament generally. And that had an impact then on the UK society because these scenes coming out of the parliament and then already in a very charged atmosphere. You would recall that we had seen hundreds of thousands of people coming out in London and other cities of the UK in support of the Palestinians and against what Israel was doing there, this totally indiscriminate killing. But after that, what we saw was also the fact that there were many calls that the Muslims of living in the UK had adopted an anti-Semitic attitude, at least segments of that population. And then there was this unfortunate drawing of lines, between those calling for those sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and the Muslim cause, and others who were more concerned about the Jewish cause and basically were more for Semitism. I think this crisis has to be managed in the UK because Labour Party is likely to win the next elections, which is supposed to be held next year, or second half of this year. So I think Keir Starmer, who is likely to be the next Prime Minister of the UK, as per the polls, has a big responsibility. His deputy, Angela Rayner, who was here in Pakistan actually, I met her, she visited Pakistan last year. We had a detailed conversation, interestingly. Seemed like a pretty reasonable person. So I think because Labour has traditionally represented the minorities in the UK, and a lot of Muslim vote goes for Labour, a lot of Pakistani origin vote in the UK goes to Labour. So that is why I think Scottish National Party, on the other hand, is now led by Hamza Yusuf, like a Muslim. So it's a unique situation, but I think it's important. And then there are the Tories, who have less representation from Muslims, but there are leaders like Saida Warsi, again Baroness Saida Warsi. There are others as well. But now the party is led by Rishi Sunak, who's a practicing Hindu. So it's a very unique situation that we see in the UK right now. And unfortunately, in the short term, I see these Islamophobic feelings on the rise in the UK. So we hope that once the situation in Gaza hopefully gets diffused, then we would see a gradual lessening of this tension.
Right, let me proceed with the discussion. Let me bring in Professor Dr. Mohammed Saeed, is educationist, into the discussion also. Dr. Saeed, now where you trace back the origins to this particular trend of rise in Islamophobia, particularly in the UK? Of course, we have seen a considerable and alarming rise in Islamophobic incidents since 7th of October. But going back into the history, where do you trace that origin?
Thank you so much. I would draw the attention towards the fact that We don't believe in Islamophobia or anti-Semitism emotions, and we don't have this ideology. Our period of rise for 1000 years, that is marked by peace and coexistence. There has not been a single communalist clash during that past history. These concepts of Islamophobia and anti-Judaism or things like that, or communalist clashes, communalist conflicts, these are the products of colonial and imperialist powers. They started it. When they came to rise, they put forward the concepts of these things. I generally say, for example, that there has been no concept of minority and majority during 1000 years of our rise. No terminology of minority and majority in terms of religion or other things was used. They were all people were citizens of the state. So these communalist clash, whether it is in the great subcontinent of India, whether in other parts of the world, that has been created by the communists, by the colonial powers and imperial powers. And these are fueled, continuously fueled. In the same way, I would say uh, this Palestinian issue, this is not Muslim Jew issue. This is human issue. This is a political issue. And as per the policy and mannerism of these powers, they have made it a communalist issue, Muslim and non-Muslim issue, or Muslim or Jew issue. This is not like that. This is a political issue. The people who were ousted from their homes in Israel, they were Jews, they were Christians, and they were Muslims. So this is a common cause of them. There is no scope for labeling it as Muslim Jew issue. But this has been the policy of the colonial powers and the present imperialist powers. They are continuing it, they are fueling it. This is their conscious effort to make every issue a religious issue, while they are not religious issues, they are human issues, humanitarian problems. So first, you talked about the origin. I would trace the origin with the rise of the colonial and imperialist powers. They have turned everything into religious and communalist clash. This Islamophobia, I believe that this concept has the same origin, and anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish or anti-Christians, anti-Hindus or anti-Muslims, all these anti-religious anti issues in the name of religion, they are created by and they are projected by these powers. British people, British government, that is based on secularism. All the people, Hindu Prime Minister, Muslim Scottish Prime Minister of Scotland, and other members of the Parliament, they have come through a secular system. So when someone of them or some ones of them, they raise their voice against anti-human atrocities in Gaza, in Palestine, how can it be labeled as sectarian? How can it be labeled as communalist? This is against the paradigm, political paradigm of the state. The whole constitution and the election of these members, that's not been on the basis of religion. So this is simple thing that they are calling for actions against human atrocities in Gaza, in Palestine, and they are unduly labeling it as Islamophobia. This terminology, Islamophobia, and this concept I just said, that is a creation of these powers. We have never been any threat to any community in totality. We are not against Hindus, we are not against Jews, we are not against Christians, Buddhists, any of the community in totality. we are against the oppressors only. And this is a very simple thing. So this is highly undue and condemnable on the part of the British rulers or imperialist rulers to call these clashes um, the communist clashes, Muslim Jews clashes, and things like that. This is unfair, totally unfair. Their voice is genuine. There should be ceasefire. There can be wars between forces, but not between force and common people.
Right.
War going on in Gaza is against common people. On the one side is a force, on the other side, common people are being slaughtered. If there is a conflict and fight between the forces, then there would have been no objection perhaps. But this is against the fact. This is against that.
Your
So,
point is well taken. Dr. Saeed, your point is well taken, very comprehensively elaborated as to the origins of these particular anti-concepts that come forth. Let me take this particular point. When you say that whatever is happening in Gaza, the kind of brutality that has been unleashed on the innocent people in Gaza, it's not a Muslim and a Jew issue. It's a issue of humanity. Let me take this point to Mr. Saleem. Mr. Saleem, now when we talk about those protesters, the pro-Palestinian protesters who've been outside, especially on that particular day, now they're talking about what is happening to the innocent people in Gaza. How justified it is to connect them or their narrative or their demand of whatever they want to express as to what is happening in Gaza as anti-Semitic. As Dr. Saeed has pointed out, it's not a Muslim-Jew issue. It's more of a humanitarian and an issue of humanity.
Yeah. I think Dr. Saeed made some good points. It's true, and we should recall that when these huge demonstrations took place in London in particular, they were bigger than perhaps demonstrations in any Muslim countries that took place in this issue, on this issue, number one. And secondly, they were demonstrations of a very mixed nature, a very mixed composition. It was not just Muslims there. There were Muslims, there were Christians, there were Jewish even, all segments of the British society. And I think they were there because it is primarily a humanitarian issue. Innocent people are being slaughtered there or massacred there, or in this indiscriminate action, which has led to a huge loss of life, particularly of women and children, and also the conditions that are obtaining there now, the conditions in terms of literally starvation and hunger and a total lack of civilization in terms of basic amenities. I think this is a common cause for humanity, of course. It is definitely, like, it's not just a Muslim-Jewish issue, of course. I mean, it's not a Muslim-Jewish issue per se, because it's an issue of it's a right of self-determination of the Palestinian people, first of all. So it's a political issue in that way. Then it's basically a legal issue as well. It's an international issue, which has been debated since long in the international forums such as the United Nations over and over again. So it's an issue which attracts a whole lot of attention from all segments of the world. Like, for instance, we have seen very strong reaction coming from Brazil, where the president of Brazil, he recalled the ambassador from Israel, the Brazilian ambassador, and he made a very, very strong statement which was condemned by the Israelis. I think probably a stronger statement than we saw coming from many Muslim countries. So yes, I think we have to see it as such, and it is important that this issue does not become a divisive issue, but rather this should become it should become an issue which should bring people together, together for a common cause of humanity. And that is why it is so unfortunate that we see this Islamophobic feeling rising in the UK and some other European countries as well. This whole sort of, this whole affiliation with the Palestinian call cause being called anti-Semitic.
So when you speak of this particular rise in this particular trend of Islamophobic feeling in the UK and some other Western countries in particular, when we talk about that particular trend rising, what happens to be the responsibility of the member of the parliament, because he is actually representing a wider chunk of the population? So such statements, more specifically that statement by Lee Anderson about Sadiq Khan, that is London and is being controlled by the Islamists. Do you think that was justified at all, coming from a responsible position, being a member of the parliament?
Not
no
at
matter
all.
how much frustrated you are?
Not at all. I think that was, he's called it, it's a clumsy. Clumsy is not the right word here. It was a very irresponsible and a very unfortunate statement coming at that particular juncture. And these are the type of statements which basically add fuel to the fire. And they have to be stopped. They have to be, it has to be ensured that no member, because you very rightly said, members are elected by the people, and they represent all shades of opinions within a constituency. And there's no constituency in the UK which is 100% Jewish or 100% Christian or 100% Muslims. They're all mixed constituencies. And in any case, when you're part of the parliament, then you are not just representing one particular constituency, then you are representing the people. These type of statements, and particularly again Sadiq Khan has been a very good mayor of London. He's widely respected, and he's not just seen as a Muslim or a Pakistani origin, but rather a very balanced politician who's doing a great job, and he's tried to bring the communities in London together. London, we have to remember that London is a very multicultural and a very multi-faith and a multiracial city now. In fact, probably like whites are not even, like let's say the English, so to speak, are, like the white British, they're not even perhaps in a majority there. It's so mixed. So if you are a mayor of such a city, then it is, you have to be very, very balanced. And that is why a lot of people think that he is doing a great job. And he's, and not just in terms of bringing people together, but also in terms of development and sort of, of London. So I think such statements coming from politicians, and it was very right to suspend him. In fact,
was that sufficient? Was that action that has been taken, or suspension, is it sufficient to send out a loud and a clear message that we believe this particular party, which he actually belonged to, believes in inclusiveness?
I think there should have been a stricter action in this situation, because it would have been better to make an example out of it. So so the others should sort of get this idea that they cannot make irresponsible statements, they cannot make divisive statements, they cannot be seen as sort of using this very, very sensitive situation for their political ends, because they have to rise beyond what can be termed as selfish and parochial and narrow-minded and very partisan. This is not what you expect of members of parliament.
Right, talking about the proceedings of the House in the House of Commons that day, when that particular resolution which was brought by the Scottish National Party that actually called for an immediate ceasefire. Now, taking the amendments which went against the president, right, taking it from the other party, only the government party amendment could be included if there has to be something. So how do you analyze the role of the speaker himself regarding that particular resolution that was put forth by the Scottish National Party, urging for an immediate ceasefire there?
Yeah, I mean, the call for ceasefire, it was very clear in that particular language, but it was there in the other resolution, that the amendment that the Labour proposed as well, although they had so many caveats, to it, and it was a very long language, but the more important thing is that you see, when you introduce the amendments, then you basically kill the motion, because if they had not introduced the amendment, then there would have been a vote on the resolution. But when you introduce the amendment, then there's no vote. That is why basically it was actually an attempt to kill the motion, which they did, unfortunately. And,
And many are saying that it actually benefited the Labour Party.
of course.
I mean, you already mentioned a fact that a lot of Muslim vote goes towards the Labour.
Yeah.
So if this particular resolution by the Scottish National Party, which was calling for an immediate ceasefire, do you think it's going to have any political implication with the Labour Party in the upcoming elections, specifically talking about the Muslim vote that comes to it?
Yeah, I think what the analysts are saying is, number one, we have to remember the Jeremy Corbyn incident. You know, remember, like, he was the Labour leader and he was sort of, termed anti-Semitic by many, by those who accused him of being anti-Semitic. And that actually, in some ways, really adversely affected his political career. So now, because of that, I think the Labour leaders are being extra careful that there's no charge of anti-Semitism, because the Jewish influence is still very much there on the British political landscape. So I think it was because of that, and it would have, of course, implications for the next election. In this whole episode, Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, as per many analysts, he's come across as a sort of weak person, which would not really benefit him in the election. You've rightly said that because Labour generally, like, it caters for the minorities and gets a Muslim vote in the UK. But in this particular situation, I think they were sort of looking for more for the broader vote, and were trying to ensure that they're not seen as sort of, like, anti-Semitic in any way, because of the Jeremy Corbyn example, perhaps. But I think what they've done is has probably resulted in alienating many Muslims vote, and that doesn't really, augur well for Labour's chances in the next elections.
Right. Dr. Saeed, what's your understanding? We'll talk about Lee Anderson's specific statement about London's Mayor Sadiq Khan. Any sort of justification to that particular statement, or also when he talks about apologizing, saying that that was perhaps clumsy and that was because of sheer frustration? And also, do you think the kind of action that has been taken after his statement was made is sufficient to send a message of inclusivity on the part of Conservatives?
Thank you again. The state of affairs has been explained by Honorable Foreign Secretary. The situation is the same. It is out of frustration, and it is their internal politics, their elections. They are involved in it. And apart from that, their general mindset is there, imperialistic mindset, that is also there. And they don't know that they are putting the peace of their own country and peace of the world at stake. When you fuel these kinds of strifes, the whole peace in the entire world is threatened, and they see it. World is protesting against this issue, and there are processions in Europe and America, and from people or followers of all religions and all races, all communities. They must respond to them. They must realize. They must put an end to these atrocities. There must be ceasefire. All the issues in the world, the hotspots which have been left by these powers, like Palestinian issue, Kashmir issue, and other issues, they must be solved through peaceful negotiations. There must be ceasefire in Palestine as well, and peaceful negotiations must be initiated, and some solution must be sorted out. And the whole world community of nations, irrespective of religion, they should come forward against such issues, such atrocities, human killings, evacuations, and whatnot. So my message is that the war must come to an end. There should be ceasefire, and there should be a peaceful solution of this issue, along with other issues in the world. The world must be stable. There must be economic justice, peace, freedom prevailing in the world. And there must be common efforts from all the nations, and Pakistan may play its leading role in it. This is my concluding message.
Dr. Saeed, when you talk about Pakistan's role, Pakistan should be leading such type of efforts. Earlier, we saw Pakistan spearheaded an effort at the United Nations General Assembly. 15th of March was declared as the International Day to combat Islamophobia. There was a resolution on the behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Pakistan moved that resolution. It got an overwhelming response at the United Nations General Assembly. We've seen Pakistani authorities going in that particular direction, raising their voice. We have a lot of messages that have come from the top leadership of Pakistan regarding combating Islamophobia. So that remains very clear that Pakistan's position and its endeavors, its efforts on that particular front. Now, after the United Nations, of course, that resolution was passed that had the consent of a lot of other nation states also. So when there is so much urgency and sensitivity associated with the matter, especially after the massacre of Muslim worshippers in the Christchurch mosque, we saw at the hand of a white supremacist over there. Don't you think the members of the parliament of the major Western world basically have a huge responsibility when this particular phenomenon has been tried to be addressed by the United Nations by declaring a specific day to combat it, and especially in those circumstances, such type of statements coming from the members of the parliament. Don't you think the responsibility increases manifold?
Yes, exactly. As these powers are dominating, it is their responsibility basically, and they should respond to it. But the hard tragedy is that they are insensitive to it. And all the nations, all the countries, all the leadership of the world that must emphasize and that must emphasize these issues, and they should focus and they should draw their attention to the responsibility these powers have, because they are dominating, and they have to proceed with peaceful solutions of these problems. So far as resolution of the United Nations and that has been passed with clear majority and that's supported, that is something fine, that is something appreciable, heartening, but this is not enough. Nations of the world must come forward and make superpowers realize the value of peace in the world. All the wars in the world must come to an end. Wars create chaos, instability, and inequality, and things like that. So wars must be avoided. War is there in our philosophy, but as policy, no war policy should be carried on.
Right, Dr. Saeed, now one last thing that I just want you to shed a little bit of light on your analysis regarding this particular statement as to what options would be available for the Muslims in the immediate future, the British Muslims, after looking at this particular statement by Baroness Sayeeda Warsi. The attack on Sadiq Khan is very deliberate. It's an attempt to stigmatize, stereotype, and silence British Muslims and stop the younger generations of British Muslims from entering public life. How the British Muslims should be going ahead given these particular circumstances of rise in Islamophobia there?
This, I said, this Islamophobia concept, this has been created, forwarded, and projected by the ruling classes of these countries as well, these powerful countries. And the responsibility or the policy that Muslims can adopt. Basically, I don't speaking in terms of Muslims and non-Muslims, but as there has been issue created by British Parliament and in terms of Muslims, so I would say that Muslims should avoid, if there is a trend of making it, again, I would say Muslim-Jew clash, they should proceed with the ideology of humanity, present it as humanitarian issue and convince the people that this is no clash between Muslims or non-Muslims internationally or in the British country, British Parliament in Britain. So we have to convince that we don't believe in sectarianism or communalism. This is the policy. If the people believe, if they can gain support of the people, then there would be pressure on the British government.
Well taken. Dr. Saeed, please stay with us. Mr. Saleem, now what should be done by the international community, especially given the fact that there was a resolution passed by the United Nations to declare 15th of March as International Day to combat Islamophobia? What could be the possible options in order to hold those people accountable who are committing those acts which are considered as Islamophobic?
Yeah, I think that was a very important resolution, which was, of course, sponsored by Pakistan and got an overwhelming support within the United Nations, which suggests that there is a very clear feeling amongst the world leadership that this type of division should not be aggravated. It is incumbent upon the national leaders, particularly in European countries and Western countries, to ensure that the significant Muslim populations that they have now are not discriminated. They can, because these have to be, in some ways now, a multicultural societies where these minorities should have a right to live as per their religious ideals, of course, within the parameters of the laws and social ethos of those societies. But the important thing is that they should not be subjected to hate crimes. They should not be subjected to discrimination. They should not be subjected to marginalization, which we see, by the way, happening in some European countries. When I was ambassador to Germany or ambassador to Italy, we used to encounter situations where certain political leaderships would try to exploit any such issues, like as we see now, to coalesce the Christian votes there. And unfortunately, it is these type of leaders, like in France, Le Pen and Marine Le Pen and AFD, in Germany and in Italy, some people would say, like the ruling party presently, they have been involved in such policies in the past. So I think that needs to be avoided, and perhaps it would be great if countries could get together and have some and work out some sort of a charter of sort of to protect the sort of different minorities of different faiths living in different countries, and sort of cement their rights and responsibilities.
Right, Mr. Jauhar Saleem, former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. And Professor Dr. Mohammad Saeed, educationist, thank you very much for your time. Dr. Saeed, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.